Everybody. If you are here for our second carbon crediting data framework webinar today, you are here in the right place. We are going to get started in just a moment, so sit tight. We're just going to give a moment for folks to join us from the waiting room. Hello, hello, and welcome everybody. My name is Bonnie Lay, and I am the principal for the Carbon Markets Initiative here at RMI. And I'm so excited to welcome you guys today to our second webinar focused on the carbon crediting data framework. The first webinar, which happened this Monday, was focused on an introduction to the CCDF. And today we're going to have a chance to dive deeper into how to actually use the CCDF. So if we pop to the next slide, I'll go over how we're going to be spending this next hour together today. So first, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the Carbon Markets Initiative at RMI and give you a really quick walkthrough of what the CCDF is. Then we'll get to be able to hear from the CCDF users themselves. So first, you'll get to get an introduction to Centigrade, which is a platform that's focused on digitizing, standardizing, and connecting carbon credit data. And then we're going to have a panel discussion together with Bridge Carbon and Octavia Carbon, and you'll get to hear how project developers are leveraging structured carbon credit data. Finally, we're going to have an audience Q&A session at the very end. And so for all of you joining us here on the webinar, you could use that Zoom Q&A function box at any time point during the presentation to enter your questions. We're going to handle them all at this moderated Q&A section at the end. Great. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit more about what the Carbon Markets Initiative actually does. So the voluntary carbon market, for those of you who are working actively in it, you realize how important it is to actually have a reliable data foundation. That's really what's necessary to really understand how carbon credits are performing. And so our program is really focused on and rooted in that data, and we work on bringing light to it in two major different ways. So on one side, we really want to help make sure that that carbon credit data underlying credit performance is more transparent and structured and interoperable. That's really core to that CCDF work that I mentioned. And we have another stream of work that's really focused on how could we actually help communicate about the carbon markets more clearly for those who are not subject matter experts in this area. So how could we help buyers and other stakeholders be able to navigate that complexity and be able to translate what could be really granular data into pieces that are more digestible for being able to get to insights. So for today's presentations and the entire CCDF scope of work, that's squarely in that first category around strengthening carbon credit data. You could always check out our website to learn a little bit more about the work that we do on the demystifying side as well. So now let's dive more into the CCDF. So the carbon crediting data framework is really working to address one of the challenges that we and many other stakeholders have seen. That carbon credit data is by definition really, really complex right now. It's potentially locked behind paywalls. It could be difficult to actually figure out how to pull the key measurement data that matters from dense PDFs. And it's really difficult to compare different projects to each other. And so this is why our team at RMI focused our time and effort on creating the CCDF. And this is a toolkit that brings order to this data chaos. It has been launched as a completely free and public good for anyone to be able to access and look into. And you could think of this data framework as a super organized structure that could hold all of the carbon credit data from hundreds of different data points that come from different project providers and be able to keep track of it in a clear way. And so this is going to allow for you to be able to then understand the assumptions, the calculations, and the management data behind the project. So anyone could actually compare different projects to each other and be able to have an informed and data-rooted way to be able to make assessments on project quality. And so the CCDF was created from more than 160 different sources. It includes more than 570 data points that's organized in the structured form. So you really have this comprehensive picture of how the carbon credit is functioning. And it's also designed to be modular so that it could work well with other inputs. So this means that anyone could actually plug the CCDF framework into your own tools or your own systems and be able to tweak or build on top of it. I'm going to dive in now into what actually the CCDF toolkit contains. And so we created tools in a couple of different formats to make sure that all different stakeholder types can actually use it and leverage it in the way that works best for you. So you could reference the executive report to be able to see the big picture of why we decided to create the CCDF, what challenges it's addressing, and some of the process and the methodology behind the design choices that were made in the CCDF. If you want to actually dive into the framework itself and be able to see all of the different fields and how they're structured, you could click into the Excel spreadsheet that is very user-friendly to be able to orient, and every single field will be visible there. If you are a more technical person, we also have technical documentation and JSON schema of this framework, so you're able to do the full software integration and be able to leverage the tool directly. So all of these tools are available on our RMI website, as well as a public GitHub page. And so that's how you're going to be able to explore and interact with the CCDF. That's as much as I'm going to go into the CCDF today. If you want to learn more, please refer to a recording from the first webinar that we did this Monday, and you'll be able to see a lot more of the walkthrough in that. The focus of today's webinar is going to be fully on how we could actually put the CCDF to use. And so without further ado, I'll love to turn it over to Maddie of Centigrade, and she'll be able to share with you more about their platform, which uses CCDF to organize the carbon credit data on their back end. So Maddie, over to you.
Amazing. Thanks, Bonnie. Yes, I'll keep this relatively short with the caveat of if anyone's interested in digging into the actual platform itself, getting a demo on the specific screens or just chatting more, please reach out or find us on our website. Happy to, dive into it in much more detail. But essentially, I'll give you a quick overview of what we are. Centigrade is a data utility platform. And essentially, we were developed in response to several of the significant issues that the VCM is currently facing. As we're all aware, and as Bonnie briefly mentioned, project data is often scattered across different platforms. It's inconsistent, and it's usually hard to verify. Different methodologies and standards use different structures. Reporting can be opaque and can often be hidden behind different paywalls. And from the project developer point of view, it's often expensive, and workflows can be analog and pretty inefficient. And as a result, even really strong projects can have a hard time differentiating themselves and their quality. And buyers, investors, and other stakeholders often don't have sufficient information or knowledge to make actionable decisions. And as we've all seen, this uncertainty has pretty significant ramifications on the market as a whole. So Centigrade essentially was built a little under a few years ago in response to this data problem. And using the CCDF as the underlying structure, the Centigrade platform provides project developers with a way to create standardized, structured, and dynamic digital records of their project's data. So with Centigrade, all of the project's core data lives in one place. It's centralized, and it can be exported or shared in any format that's needed, and directly with really any entity that needs it. And so for buyers, this then means being able to access clear and accessible project data, potentially run deep due diligence without having to navigate a maze of inconsistent reports, and really being able to filter and compare and dig into the different project data. Alexis, if you wouldn't mind going to the next screen. Again, I'll really briefly go over kind of the three different elements of the platform. And so, yeah, there are three parts that make up the product. The first is all about project developers. And we essentially call it the project developer side of the platform. So in this regard, we've created, again, using the CCDF as that underlying structure, we've created a standardized data framework for projects, which builds on top of the CCDF by taking a methodology, digitizing that methodology, so creating specific data collection fields that can then capture, the dynamic methodology specific information over time. On the buyer side of things, so that's kind of the second piece of the puzzle. Essentially, all of that data gets externally represented in a more accessible and visually pleasing format. This is our view or our external representation or side of the platform. And this visualization layer makes the project data easy to compare and analyze at really different levels of synthesis. So depending on how much data, an entity wants to see, we're working to accommodate all levels of synthesis. And finally, that third piece is all about sending data and making workflows more efficient. That's the API essentially, which is harder to show, but essentially refers to a secure integration layer that can connect the project data to any sort of external entity and reporting system. So these three pieces work together to make up the platform. And again, the goal is to make project information transparent, consistent, and easier to manage and share. And our goal is to create, critical infrastructure that really allows high quality projects to, show their quality and their value, and to help buyers understand and trust what they're buying. So yeah, again, that was a really quick overview, but if you want to see what this looks like in practice, please reach out to us. And yeah, happy to go into it in more depth. But that's all from me. Back to the RMI team.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that quick overview, Maddie. And now we'll love to be able to turn over to the panel discussion. So I'd love to invite up Tom from Centigrade, who's going to be moderating the session, along with Donnie from Bridge Carbon, as well as Speciosa from Octavia Carbon. So over to the three of you.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be speaking about Centigrade and some of the people that we've been working with today. Um, so why don't we start with intros? So just quick me, I'm our Director of Business Operations here at Centigrade. So work a lot with our project developers and whatnot, and closely with Maddie, who you just met. But let's talk about the other folks on the call. So why don't you go first, Donnie? You're showing up first on my screen. If you want to give a quick intro and like a brief overview about Bridge Carbon to everyone on the call.
Sure. Hold on one second. Am I off mute?
Yeah, you're good. We can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, sorry, I can't see whether I'm off mute or not, but I'm Donnie Alexander. I am our Chief Carbon Officer here at Bridge Carbon. And Bridge Carbon is a project developer. Our goal is to empower the most vulnerable communities to address climate change and drive to sustainable development. In practice, what that means is that we have several areas where we focus on working with communities to address climate change. The biggest area of this is with cook stoves. So we run cook stove projects across Southeast Asia and Africa. And in those countries, we develop cook stoves, we manufacture cook stoves, we have a manufacturing site, and we work to with communities across the 5 or 6 African countries and 4 Southeast Asian countries. We also have a methane business where we look at basically leakages of methane as they're distributed to homes, and we fix those leakages. And we have a small NBS program where we're working with alternative wetting and drying of rice paddies in Laos. So we have 3 main businesses, and these are supported by our manufacturing, as I mentioned. We have 1 large hub in South Africa and various retail stores across sub-Saharan Africa. But our goal, really, in addition to impacting communities and climate change, is to provide projects that are of highest quality integrity, and transparency. So that's really our North Star as we do everything, is we ask ourselves those questions. Is this going to be high quality? Is it integrity? And are we transparent? And that's where this comes in with our connection and us partnering with Centigrade. The integrity, the quality, and the transparency can all be shown and highlighted through that work that we're doing with Centigrade. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Donnie. And over to you, Speciosa, if you want to introduce and talk a little bit more about Octavia Carbon.
Hey, so hello everyone. My name is Pesio Samudeu. I'm the communications manager at Octavia Carbon, where we're building the Global South's first direct air capture company. Essentially, what we do is we design, manufacture, and deploy machines that capture CO2 from the atmosphere for permanent storage. Our mission is to help reverse the effects of climate change by scaling down the cost curve, and while also creating economic opportunities within the region. As part of that, we are leveraging the unique advantages of Kenya, especially renewable energy, to overcome the challenges that have hindered the wide-scale adoption of direct air capture technology. And by doing so, we hope to be at the forefront of helping address the climate issue. And a big part of my role, of course, has been communicating our impact to various stakeholders. And through this, we have seen the challenges that Bonnie has highlighted in the VCM, where there is need for a lot of transparency and credibility in how you share data with the various stakeholders. And over the months, we have been working with Centigrade to enhance this, especially for our pilot project, which is a direct air capture and geological storage facility we are deploying here in Kenya within the Great Rift Valley. And I'm happy to be in this conversation.
Thanks, Speciosa. Okay, my first kind of icebreaker for both of you. What would you say are some of the common frustrations that you run into in the VCM? And this could be data, it could be storytelling, it could be just workflow in the market. Whichever one of you would like to start. Okay, all right, Speciosa, you go first then, because I introduced Donnie first.
No worries. Yeah, definitely. I think one of the frustrations, definitely, when it comes to storytelling and even sharing the data about our project, is how duplicative the requests from various stakeholders can be. And especially whereby there's no structured framework in terms of how this data is shared, it always feels like you are reinventing the wheel whenever you're sharing this data, because various stakeholders, even when you think of the buyers, they have different priorities. Some buyers care about MRV, some care about social impact. So as much as they are both seeking the same project info, how you tailor it every time needs to be restructured and reformatted. And without clear frameworks on how to go about this can be tedious and sort of take away the time to more core priorities within the project.
Awesome. Basically, lots of how do I get this data to people? It's all duplicative. All these RFPs you probably need to fill in as well. Donnie, any particular things you want to talk about there?
Yeah, I mean, Specioso has highlighted some of the main issues that we face. I will definitely add that in addition to, some of the how do you package your data, there are different questions from different buyers or stakeholders. I would say that the understanding of what is quality and what is not is very opaque. And without a platform like Centigrade or a way to show that you are actually providing a real ton, that what you're doing is high quality, it's hard to differentiate yourself. And so I think that is one of the challenges that I think it really exists, is for buyers to understand what is the difference between this methodology and that methodology, and what does this mean, right? And then, as you said, I mean, you get into these PDs and MRs and there are 70 or 80 pages, and what information is pertinent and relative for those buyers or those stakeholders, and pulling that out in a way that is digestible for different audiences is really important. And it relieves the time that alleviates the time that we need to spend going and doing each task, like you mentioned, Spacio, every single time, because it's already done.
So it actually lines up with a follow-up question I was going to ask. How do you feel that having kind of like a standardized data structure, like even in a live way, like in Centigrade, really helps with this? So that's
Yeah,
back over to you, Donnie.
Yeah, I'll just add to this. I mean, for me, it is highlighting all of the key points that a PD and MR cannot highlight, right? And putting the most important things up front and center. When we look at what we do at Bridge Carbon, we want to be able to definitely show that everything we are doing is with the highest quality. But that is lost in the market of hundreds of PDs coming out from various hundreds of project PDDs coming out from various developers. And why is this? Why are we doing everything so high quality? And what are the key points? If you're able to put that on a platform that highlights what is standard operating procedure, and what are we doing that is different or better, that is helps us tell the story instead of us just saying it. They can actually see the metrics by which we're, comparing ourselves to others.
Oh, that's great to hear. Like anything you'd want to add to that, Speciosa?
Yeah, definitely. I think having a structure like the centigrade ones allows us to sort of focus on the important aspects once the stakeholders review the info and they go after what they really need, given that the information is already structured in a way where it's easy to access the different project components. It's easy now to sort of shift the conversation in terms of, as how Donnie has highlighted, is this info credible, but more of what does this information mean and how will this look like as the project scales. So it's now becomes less of a data issue, but more what does this data mean and how will this data change as the project scales.
Awesome. I guess I was going to ask, so as well, like structuring that data, it means that it's like becomes a lot easier to communicate to people. And I imagine that an application that's probably like important to both of you as well is like if you're speaking with buyers or investors, and like how does thinking about things in this more structured way help you in those kind of either investor or buyer conversations? As well, it might even be like how you're presenting data. Like I know there's a lot of DMRV data that we're doing together, Donnie, and maybe that is also something that this helps be able to communicate to those folks. Um, Donnie first.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's exactly right. This helps us structure our conversations into what is the most important thing that we want to highlight and share. So as Tom alluded, right, we've decided as a company that we're going away from surveys, right? We feel that surveys are normative and provide a response no matter how good you do the surveys. People will provide you with a response that they want you to hear, or they think you want to hear, right? Like when you go to the dentist and the dentist says, how often do you brush your teeth? Well, in America, everybody says twice a day, no matter what, right? And I'm sure that people brush their teeth once a day, 3 times a day, not at all if you're my 5-year-old sometimes, right? It's not consistent. And what digital data is able to show to highlight to a buyer is what we're saying is actually happening. We are showing you that we can't fudge this, right? This is third-party encrypted data that is highlighting what is actually happening in the field so you can trust us. And that is, I think, something that's immeasurable in what it does for our credibility in a space where it's not had this whole space has not been the most I don't know trustworthy space. And so this brings us and brings us ahead of the group, showing, yeah, this is exactly what is happening on the ground, and you can trust those data.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly what we're all trying to say is like the data almost becomes immutable, that if this has come from a third party source, you can see what's actually happening and you can see this is a real thing. And maybe that's something that's a bit more difficult when it's kind of just buried in static documents. Speciosa, anything in particular around structured data in terms of like conversations even you have with investors or buyers and how it kind of helps with that?
Yeah, definitely. So having a structure like the CCD sort of the carbon credit data framework helps sort of create a shared language in terms of how you're communicating to these various stakeholders without not necessarily have to reinventing the wheel every time you are responding to them, solving a key aspect where you need the data to be interoperable, like Bonnie highlighted in the beginning of the conversation. And with Centigrade sort of digitizing this, it makes it even easier for project developers like us to aggregate the project data.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that this is the kind of approach that's almost like the way the market's going to go forward, right? Is that it's all based on the data and how it's been structured, making it just much more interoperable, even as you said. I had another particular question for you, Specio. So, because I know that you guys are just about to do kind of like really a lot of like the big work on your project in terms of first injection, validating that and all sorts. So like you have gone through a lot of stuff kind of like in the early stages. So how did you approach communicating your project's values to buyers when you were kind of at those earlier stages fairly recently?
So a key aspect of it, of course, has been radical transparency. Transparency to the various stakeholders really matters. So while engaging with them, we always highlighted what's available from the project in terms of data, what gaps are there, and highlighting how best we can work around the gaps that we have identified. So one thing we came to understood is various stakeholders, they also care about the various stages of success. It's not about waiting to have everything in place so that you can share it all at once. So even highlighting sort of the gaps to the stakeholders and the various stages of success, which might include failures, because sometimes you end up developing things like the MRV framework from scratch and all that and getting feedback. So transparency is key while building a pilot project or an initial project, and that has really worked for us in the sense that we don't claim to have everything in place. It's a trial and error. We learn from what we gather and get to refine the process as we go.
And what's some of the main learnings that you kind of took out of that trial and error process?
I think one of the things that the learnings that we had, especially when we were working around sharing this data, is PDFs can really, really, really be gruesome in terms of working with them, because sometimes you find you want to share a project update, you have to look at the latest version that was updated by a team member and stuff like that. So having core aspects of the data really sort of outlined, which is great, because we're with the Centigrade platform, you get this in terms of tiers and the various project proponents that you want to share. So starting collecting this as early as possible also really helps, so that if you get even to later stages, sort of the verifications and the likes of even creating a project design document, it's a matter of sort of downloading such folders from platforms like Centigrade, or even just aggregating this information in a streamlined way. So it's never too early to start. Start from the get-go. That makes it really easier to have this data in place and even to have conversations with these various stakeholders and provide the evidence that they may need from time to time.
No, thank you. And you're actually touching on the next point I was going to relate to, which is kind of like how transparency is informing relationships. So, I mean, let's start with you, Donnie. So, obviously, there's a lot of complex data going on. I mean, we're having conversations every week around how to manage all aspects of data. And whether it's like partners or funders or other stakeholders that you're working with, how have you found like being just much more transparent around the data that you have with certain partners is really helping like reinforce those relationships and making them more credible?
Yeah, I think for us as Bridge Carbon, coming in and really needing to show that we are high quality and transparency in this time. I'll give an example of new investors that we've had, is being able to show them real data that we have in the field to be able to project what we expect to have going forward. Being able to show that those data are digital, that they're collected by a third party, or that we use the most stringent protocols in our field, and being able to quickly and easily share that with them is going to be so important, right? Because every investor is now, I would say, different than 10 years ago, but now cares about this because they recognize the failures that have occurred because of lack of transparency in this space, right? And so my view is that the only way to succeed is to have radical transparency, because the investors are no longer going to trust, oh yeah, we're gonna have 4 tons of household and it's gonna be great, right? They need to see the data. They need to see that the data are robust and real and actual, that actually have what we say we have. And so for us, being able to show all of that, right? You're able to say, oh, we're confident that it's here, right? We're not hiding behind anything. This is the methodology we used, and here's why. Here are all the benefits that are provided, and it's all in a place that doesn't make it look like we're trying to we're not trying to make something more nebulous than it is. We're trying to go out there and say, this is what we think is real and we can achieve. And in some places, it's much lower than our competitors. And I sit there when I speak to the investors and I stand behind it. Well, these are real tons, right? And so we expect that we can get you at least this. Now, if we see higher usage, or we see differences in behaviors that occur, that can happen, but you will see the data that we have on this platform, and it shows that it's real. So I can't talk about what other people are doing or other project developers, but I can tell you that what you're going to get from us is what we say you'll get.
I mean, that resonates with some of the conversations I've had, in particular with some of the buyers, where it's becoming increasingly more about like, where's the data under this, and like, I need to do my own due diligence, right? Like, how much do you think things have changed like over the last kind of year or two on this front?
I mean, it's been a radical change, and it was needed, right? We couldn't continue to operate a market that was based on false promises and methodologies that were radically overestimating emissions reductions. So first, we needed to see methodologies that came in that actually were much more robust. But beyond that, the second difference is how are you sharing your data, and are those data real? And once buyers and investors start to see, okay, these data look very different than other companies' data, they'll start to look at that and say, why are they so much higher? Why are their kitchen performance tests so much higher, right? When I see these data and what's really happening with comparable stoves, people will start to ask questions. And now when I have discussions with buyers and investors, they ask about those data, where I think, several years ago, that wasn't even a question on the table.
No, that's I mean that would resonate with what my understanding is. Like, especially as over the last year, do you think you've seen like any particular changes in terms of what kind of buyers, investors are looking for in terms of data, and how have you found like being more transparent, like you mentioned earlier, has really helped reinforce those relationships?
Yeah, of course, buyers, I believe over time they've wanted the something whereby they want comparability in terms of the project that they are evaluating against each other. And you find that for projects like ours, where we are yet to have much of this concrete data on the carbon removal side, we lean to things like core benefits and stuff like that. So having sort of a framed data in place shifts the conversations in terms of, are you really creating this impact, to more of this impact, this is the impact you've created, how are you looking to scale, just like I highlighted in my previous conversation. So yeah, over time it has been more of sort of building that credibility through sharing these metrics, and in the place where they're clearly shared, the conversation isn't about are you really creating impact, rather it's how then are you looking to scale this impact further?
Yeah, much more kind of like forward looking, like what's the scale, what's the plan?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're trying to communicate all of that to kind of like new stakeholders? Have you got kind of any particular stories that you would use to kind of underpin like any new stakeholders to the market? Like, how is it we're generating impact? How is it we're being more transparent about this? Like, and it like I'm sure the data behind it all can be very messy as well.
Yeah, definitely. So one way we have found that worked really clearly is having like timely reports in terms of the impact that we are trying to track. And as part of that, it's easy to sort of over time look through what has changed across the project, whether it's on the social impact side, whether it's on development on the technology side. So having sort of the core aspects of the projects and core metrics that you're tracking as outlined even on the Centigrade platform in terms of the project components, in terms of the overview of the project, it makes it easier to sort of track the project over time and what progress has been made against the various metrics that you are evaluating. So for things like the social impact, you find that we have been sort of releasing thought leadership within the community benefit stroke community engagement side, which has really come in handy in knowing that this data we are sharing it also has other stakeholders who are backing it up, and especially where in areas like methodologies keep on changing, and if you have a sort of a third party stroke a platform like Centigrade where you can share this data, it makes it easier to just share a link to the project highlighting all these projects, and they can easily compare against other projects which are also hosted within the platform.
Yeah, I imagine methodology is changing all the time, must be a bit of a nightmare. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that like at least what we're trying to help you with is useful for keeping that message kind of consistent. I mean, Donnie, any particular other stories you want to tell just around kind of like how messy data can be and how you kind of like approach new people in the market with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things here. I will add, I mean, I will agree with Speciosa that the methodology changes, and what's the difference between this methodology and that methodology within this, standard and that standard is very confusing to a lot of, a lot of stakeholders in this space. And so that transparency about even what is the different math behind it, right, is important. And so that is a question that I get. Why did you use this input value versus that input value? What was your reasoning? And so on the Centigrade platform, it clearly lays that out, which is important. But I think also one of the things, and this is a little bit of a deviation on the question, but one of the things that I think the platform, or we hope that it does in the future, is help us, the timeline that's under which we face from the beginning of starting MRV to actually issuance of credits is really, really long, right? And I mean, it's in no other business would it, I mean, it's just very painstakingly long. And sometimes it can be very detrimental to a business when you need that cash flow, despite knowing that you had those emissions reductions for X period. And for us, as we move to digital, we see that as a way to push the space to really double down on digital MRV, right? To really double down on that and the transparency that goes around with showing that, so that we can issue on a much more regular basis as those credits are actually, as the emission reductions are actually happening. And so utilizing a platform like this to demonstrate what is actually happening in the field in closer to real time, I think is really powerful.
No, that fully resonates. Like if we're gonna, I mean, if I think about the mission of like we all want to reach net zero, right? Which means this market needs to scale significantly, like a hundred
Exactly.
times, depending on whichever kind of like forecast you're looking at. And we need to run things at a much kind of more streamlined pace if we're going to have any hope of being able to reach that. So no, fully resonated, and we're very committed to helping with that mission. Um, I have one final question for both of you, and then I think we'll end up moving to Q&A. But my last question is if we could wave the old magic wand and fix one thing about the VCM project data, whatever it may be, what would that be? And I think you may have alluded to what one of them is, Donnie, but you're allowed to highlight any others, but maybe Speciosa, if you want to go first on that.
I think someone has already waved the magic wand in the sense that interoperability is something that really is core in terms of the data framework within the VCM. And it would be essential whereby we can just automatically upload data and it's formatted for the various stakeholders. This would really be a great value add for most project developers. That's why we're thankful for the likes of Centigrade, who are really digitizing this and making it more efficient for project developers. So yeah, someone has waved my magic wand.
That's
Yeah.
great to hear. And I mean, so the CCDF obviously also aligns with other things like the Carbon Data Open Protocol CDOT, which involves multiple stakeholders. So we're trying to take a coordinated approach to make sure that that interoperability can really be realized. I'm sure there's still work to do, but yeah, that's really great to hear. Donnie, yourself?
Yeah, I mean, Speciosa really highlighted the main issue, right? And it is interpreting these long PDs and MRs that can be, and then the various attachments that go with it, with all the data behind it, is critical. Being able to quickly and easily show the key points and to have that digitized, in our case, digitized data for the digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, the actual thing that we're doing to ensure that everything is true to what we say, uploaded and shared as it comes in. And as long as we're moving in that direction to more digitization and greater transparency, I think that the market has a chance of not only just surviving, but actually being successful. And so, yeah, that's kind of my, that would be great if we could just move there tomorrow.
The two things you said is when I joined Centigrade, over 2 years ago, what is it we need to do to unlock this market? It's two things. It's make it more transparent so people can understand what's going on. You can get the trust. So therefore,
Mhm.
actually, more people will engage and that will create like that spark that we need. But also, how can you solve those workflow issues? And that's exactly the point on interoperability. I have not seeded either of these thoughts into either of the panelists, but it's really great to hear. Um, I think that's all the questions I had. So, but I believe we wanted to keep some time for Q&A. So I'll hand back over. I believe, Caitlin, you're heading up the Q&A.
I am, and sorry, my Zoom chose this moment to freeze. So I hope you can all hear
We
me.
can hear you.
Okay. So thank you, Donnie and Spenciosa, for that very rich and lively discussion. I'm going to give you guys a break for a second, and Tom and Maddie, I'm going to direct the magic wand question to you. Give us a little transition time here. So, yeah, you know the question. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it, doesn't have to be digitized data on Centigrade. What would you do to scale the market?
I can go first quickly. I mean, besides the obvious answer of policies shifting and money flowing into the market and people buying more, which would be number one. I'm personally, I've become very interested and passionate about the concept of really trying to untangle kind of the technical nuances behind different methodologies and differences between projects that, might appear quite similar, but then when you dig deep into the actual parameters that really drive the amount of credits that are generated, or other elements related to co-benefits or any sort of elements that really affect project quality at that kind of technical nuanced level, I've become really interested in that. And how do you convey that, and how does that become accessible to someone that hasn't understood cook stoves for the last 20, 25 years, like Donnie? So I think that element is something that I am, yeah, I think is really important. Like, how do you communicate that, make that accessible, and yeah, make it widely accessible to people beyond just the people that are buying, or, just the brokers, but to the broader market in general, so that it's easier to understand what quality is, what quality isn't, and hopefully, drive the entire market, towards the top. So I think that's off the top of my head, that's kind of where my current interests lie.
Yeah, sometimes those deep project comparisons can feel like it's a never-ending quest. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think like if I was waving a magic wand, it would be it would really go down this kind of standardization type route. So, and this kind of maybe lends itself a little bit towards both of the things I think we need, which are transparency and interoperability. If it was much just clearer, like what's the kind of single standard for certain pathways, it just becomes a lot easier to be able to kind of like compare certain things in this market, like how do you compare a ton of this to a ton of that and all that kind of stuff. As well, just thinking in terms of like, I'm an engineer by background, so I'm used to like breaking down things into their components and numbers. And like, a lot of these projects, like there's relatively complex kind of like claims and calculations and stuff that all behind it. But how is it like, like what I should expect for this thing? So then the people that are going above and beyond to do the right things in this market, they can get the credit for that, and like you can see that they've made rational decisions. And how is it you can really showcase that? It's part of what we're trying to do at Centigrade, but there's a lot of work to be able to kind of get to that across the whole market, standardize that.
Yeah, it's a really I feel like I think that's everybody's dream of eventually you land in a carbon market where everything is fungible and standardized and we all know
Everything makes sense.
yeah. Okay, so I think maybe this is a good question back to Donnie and Speciosa. Donnie, we'll start with you. There's a lot of I think, everybody talks to a lot of project developers and stakeholders about the importance of the methodology and how the methodology drives kind of so much about project design and project quality. Question from the chat, can you please speak to the challenges about what it means? How do you actually go about selecting that right framework and the right methodology, the MRV process, the project design components that really are so integral to quality, but can feel like a bit of a choose your own adventure to some people?
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it. A choose your own adventure
Yeah.
is is really true. So actually, the methodology piece on the cook stove side. So I'm gonna take it from the cook stove side because that's where I have the most background. When in my past life, actually, I was on the team that developed one of the latest methodologies, and the reason for that was because the methodologies gave such wildly different numbers, right? So if I went with a VMR 0006, which was in Vera, I could get a lot of tons per household. But if I went with a TPDD tech, it wasn't as much. And the rules around that were very different. One of the, I think, and I want to applaud I want to applaud the standards, is we've really moved away from methodologies that are wildly different, that you're in a very close range now. There are small differences in the way they're asking you to do things, but it's very minor. So that gives me a lot of comfort for at least the cook stove space. I do know that in NBS, the methodologies still remain pretty different across some of our standards, but at least in the cook stove space, we're seeing kind of uh, we're going towards that center where we're not so far off, and that is actually should provide confidence. Now, what happens within what a company does is where it's way more challenging, right? Like you said, the MRV processes and choosing to do X, Y, or Z. And I came to this role with this really view that we need to do our best to ensure that we have highest quality, integrity, and transparency. And so if that means that we need to spend more money on MRV, do more KPT tests, bring in the developers of the KPT to train, or or sample way over 95.5 confidence interval for the number of households that need digital monitoring. We're going to do that in this time period until we can show the space that we actually are, you know, a step above most of the PDs. And so, it's hard. And unless you have a lot of background in how should you be running these, what are the difference if you do X versus Y in a KPT, what kind of changes does that make, or who should you go with as a provider for DMRV, it is really hard for project developers. I will definitely say that. And I mean, I don't know what the advice is besides do the work and look at what other PDs, what other project developers are doing and what the newest PDs show, because there is a trend for some of the larger project developers to are moving in this space with higher quality KPTs and more DMRV, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Spencer, is there any reflections you've learned from the doc space?
Yeah, definitely. And like you've said, it's an adventure. And of course, depending on the project that you're handling, that will really determine what you go for. And also, depending on what matters to you as a project developer, will determine what the methodology, structure, framework that you go for, especially in the dark space where not so many of these methodologies have delivered credits. So there's not much credibility in terms of a lot of sort of standards and frameworks that are coming up, and you can only pinpoint to a few. So I think it all boils down at the end of the day, what do you care about you as a project developer? Do you care about just delivering credits to the market, so you go for the easy route where it's easy to just aggregate the data, or do you care about the quality of credits that you deliver, and this could sort of lengthen the process for you, meaning you won't be able to deliver any credits in the near time because there's a lot of scrutiny and all that. And of course, in the VCA market, we know quality matters, especially with the recent tailwinds that have been there. So if quality really matters to you, then you won't bargain in terms of the timelines that various methodologies or frameworks come with, and you will just sort of value that over maybe delivering credits at a fast pace to the market. So yeah, depending on the project you're handling, and if it's a novel technology you're working with, it won't be the easiest. Do take your time to understand the market, the credibility, the various methodologies I've created, and benchmark even from your peers what has worked, what has not worked. Interestingly, most of the people in the space are usually willing to share info. Those who have gone through the process will highlight what has worked and how better you can refine this stroke, prepare this in early stages of the project development process. So yeah, don't be shy to ask from other project developers who have seen what works, what doesn't work, and they are more than willing to sort of share.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe you kind of guys both mentioned this, but a little forward-looking question, and a little bit of this for some context. When we were developing the data framework that Centigrade is operationalized, we did try to go down kind of adding a verification layer to the framework, and it got very complicated very fast. And we all have talked about the importance of having really good MRV and project design and project data. And there's a lot of trade-offs on cost and quality for MRV. So in just kind of a more forward-looking, optimistic direction, if you could have one new kind of data layer or data kind of design feature in your project that would really kind of unlock your perfect MRV system. No tech, magic wand kind of scenario again. What would that be for both for cook stoves and for DAC? What do you kind of help the data really become something that you would really want to trust, and you think would really demonstrate the climate impact of these activities?
Well, I mean, I'll jump in for cook stoves. I mean, I think the next step is pushing for more digital monitoring, reporting, and verification. We need to have stove use monitors on stoves out in the field. And we're moving in that direction where thankfully, there are some auditors now who are accepting the digital data, and we'll start to, work with the registries to verify on those digital data. And that is going to be a major step for us. And I think that will be a game changer, because it will not only will it allow you to have revenue at a cycle that's much more realistic, but I think it will differentiate the projects that are really high quality from those that maybe aren't. And I think that's important going forward, is to have a differentiation in the projects, and so that you can trust the projects to really deliver that ton that they're said to be delivering.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I think within our space probably is creating that leeway where project developers feel free to share their early stage data without having to wait months down the line to have everything in place for them to sort of share these data even with the verifiers, because that I feel has held up a lot of projects, in the sense that they feel they're not there yet they do have proof of the progress that has been made, and it's not that they are stalling. It's more of much of this data takes time, and if we don't have systems that acknowledge there are gaps missing and they will take time for them to fill, then we are to some extent failing the project developers. But yeah, just having systems that acknowledge the gaps that exist within the space and that they are a work in progress.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're final question, and we'll do this a round robin. So for all four of you, I think we spent a good time talking about how hard the market is right now, how hard it is to share information and report it, and how to trust it. And we all know, I think we've all kind of know that the VCM is in a very different place now than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. And there's a constant kind of churn of new tools and solutions and collaborations and platforms emerging. And so I'm curious kind of if you could think, yeah, what are like the 1 or 2 things that either you know now that you wish you knew 3 years ago that you're going to double down on, or that you see emerging that you think have kind of tremendous potential to really move the VCM forward in the next 2 or 3 years? We'll start with Tom, and then we'll go Donnie, Speciosa, and Maddie. Will end with you. Quick, we have 3 minutes.
Okay. So, I mean, think about where we've been to where we are. A lot's changed. We're seeing things move quickly. I would like to think we're moving into a world of digital data and things being structured and things being more standardized being the future. I think there's a lot of work to do to be able to get us there. I don't think we're going to be handed anything on a silver plate, so I feel like we need to do the work to make all of this happen. I might be just saying what I want to say rather than answering your question directly, Caitlin, but that's what I'm here for and what I'm focused on, and yeah, that's what I'll say for now. I'll hand off the baton to someone else.
Donnie, you want to
Yeah.
take?
Yeah. So I think, as it should be in the VCM and across the carbon markets, the bar is always rising, right? And those behind the curve are going to be left behind. And I think it's important that we focus on quality. Investors will come if you're leading the space, if you're innovative, and that is how this industry is going to have to continue to shape. We cannot be an antiquated market that does things with paper trail, like this long system, right? And so Bridge Carbon, I think our goal is to continue to be leading that space and continue to be innovating, so that we are always with in the forefront of those changes of the market. And hopefully investors and buyers will come because of that quality. And I think that's the way the market should head, right? Where quality drives, even if it's a compliance market.
Take it away.
Okay. So yeah, I think one thing I would share is communicate your journey, not just the destination. So everything that's evolving matters as much as the end goal that you're trying to achieve. So being transparent about that really creates that credibility that stakeholders are looking for. And the best way to go about it is start structuring your data as early as possible. Don't wait for verification and all that. Yeah.
Cool. I know we're at time, but I'd just say I think it's exciting to see the push towards digital connection and the push towards harmonization within the market. So efforts like the Carbon Data Open Protocol that's ongoing and a bunch of other, auditors being more receptive to digital data. So I think the more that we can all kind of push together in this front and kind of work together to make the market less antiquated, I think is exciting and seems to be growing and becoming a trend.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you all. Thank you, panelists and Tom and Maddie for great conversation. As a reminder, and thank you everyone for joining and for sharing your questions. We did record this session, so we will send it out kind of in a follow-up email, plus all of the resources we've mentioned. And the websites kind of for both Octavia and Bridge. And never, we're all always happy to talk about the voluntary carbon market. So we're looking forward to kind of future conversations. And I hope you all have a great Thursday. Thanks, everyone.